Hello, this video is a quick tutorial on visualizing neuron models with BlenderNEURON. By the end, you should be able to create an animation of a neuron action potential, visualizing the voltage of your neuron cell model. You should already have BlenderNEURON installed. If not, I was just watching the installation tutorial which walks you through the steps. That link will be in the description under this video, then you can come back and follow this tutorial. First, you'll want your model loaded in Neuron. I have my model loaded in Neuron with 3 cells instantiated already, and I stimulated the cells to create action potentials. Here's the code I ran, written out in a Python file on the screen if you want to copy what I did. There will be a link in the description to the Hawk file samplecell.hawk, which I'll be using in this tutorial. To make sure it's loaded correctly, in the Neuron GUI, you'll want to pull up the shape plot under Graph. Here I can see my sample cells side by side, but make sure you see something in the shape plot. You'll also want to pull up the voltage axis under Graph, and then under Tools, select Run Control. And then if I run my simulation by pressing Initiate and Run, you can see I see a nice action potential in the voltage axis starting around 10 milliseconds. Make sure you're seeing the activity you're expecting in the voltage axis. Then once you have your model loaded, you can run from BlenderNEURON import neuron start. And that's it for the neuron part, so I'll just start Blender. Keep in mind that I am using BlenderNEURON 2.1 with Blender 3.5, and the API may look different if you're not using the Blender 3 series. Let's navigate to the BlenderNEURON tab. To get there, click on this icon in the top right of the view to pull up the sidebar, and the BlenderNEURON tab should be right there. Scroll all the way down, and under Node Status, it should say Connected and Listening. Then if you go back up and click on Cells in Group, you should see the cells in your model listed here. And if you click on Cell Groups, you should see one group currently. I can go ahead and immediately import my cells by pressing Import Cell Groups to Blender, and if I zoom in slightly, I can see my cells side by side there. To animate the action potential, select the group you want to animate, in this case there's only one, and then expand Cell Group Options. By default, activity is not recorded to conserve how much information is exchanged between Blender and Neuron. When you check Record Activity, the next time the simulation runs, the value you're trying to animate will be recorded. So we'll go through some of these recording options. So first select Record from each soma or section. And we want to record from each section to see the potential changing from section to section. Recording from each soma can be useful if you want to track the activation of cells in a large network of cells, for example. Then select the start and stop times for the recording. This is going to be in milliseconds. And if I pull the voltage axis back up in Neuron, I can see my action potential is happening between 10 and 15 milliseconds. So I'll start the recording at 8 milliseconds and stop at 15. Then sampling period is how often it takes a sample of the variable in milliseconds. Since this is an action potential and happens very quickly, we want to sample more often than the default once per millisecond. So we'll set it to 0.1 or once per tenth of a millisecond. Then frames per millisecond is going to be the number of frames per millisecond of neuron activity. I can slow this down by setting 1 millisecond in Neuron to 12 frames. And we want to turn this into a video, and videos are typically 24-25 frames per second. So with this, 1 second of a video would go through about 2 milliseconds of neuron activity. And then this color scale is where you can map the values to colors. You can click on these markers and then the color block underneath and change the colors to whatever you like. And the endpoints on this scale map to these variable low and high values down here. So if I go back to my voltage axis in Neuron, you can see it stays between -80 and 40. So I'll just set my variable low to -80 and my high to 40. Now to rerun the simulation and get that activity to BlenderNEURON, just re-import the cells by clicking Import Cell Groups to Blender again. So this on the bottom is the timeline, and the numbers are the frames. And remember that the action potential starts at 10 milliseconds, and we have it at 12 frames per millisecond. So the action potential should start at frame 120. So to see if it works, I can scrub along the timeline to 120 and see if I see a color change. And you can see that there is a color change with the action potential. But it's not very clear right now because you can't see the change in brightness. So to see what it looks like with the brightness change, hold Z and select Material Preview. And then when you scrub through, you can see that it's a lot clearer. Now I'll go over how to render a nice video or image of your model. First off, Blender uses a camera system, so you'll want to set the camera's view. There should be a camera by default, and you can see what the camera is seeing by pressing this camera icon, toggle the camera view. Now this is obviously too close. The view in the rectangle is the view that will be captured when you press the render button. And one way to change it is by going to the View tab in the sidebar and checking off Lock Camera to View. So now when you move your view normally, the camera will move with it. Same controls as usual, rotate by holding the middle mouse button, pan with shift in the middle mouse button, scroll to zoom to move the camera. Then, when you're done, you can uncheck Lock Camera to View to set the camera in place. We can see what that will look like by rendering an image. To render a static image, select Render and then Render Image on the top left. How long this takes will depend on the complexity of your model and your device specifications. Then if you want to save an image render, you can press Image and then Save As and choose a location. But we want a video. To render a video, you'd go to Render and then Render Animation. But first I have to set the output or select how the video will be saved. To do that, go to the Output Properties tab, which you can find on the right here, and then scroll down to Output, and select the file format. Switch it from PNG, which it is by default, to one of the video formats. I use FFmpeg video. And then select a location on your device for the file. I'm just going to send that to my Documents folder, and I'll name it Render1. When I render the video, I only want the interesting parts, not all 250 frames. So I can set the start and end times for the video down here on the bottom right. So I'll start it at, say, 100 and end at frame 180. Then if I go to press Render Animation, it will render each frame and save those to the video file in the location I specified. But of course, rendering each frame can take a while, especially with a more complex model or a weaker computer, so you might have to wait a second. And there's some things I can do to make the animation look nicer. First, the background makes it hard to see the cells in the beginning, so we'll go over how to change the background color. So I can make the background color darker by going to the World Properties tab near the Output Properties section. And then next to color, I can click and select a background color. I'm going to slide the value down to black so that the cells stick out more. And I'll just play a clip of what the render looks like with that background. I can also add a glare effect by going back to the BlenderNEURON tab and then scrolling all the way down, and at the bottom there's an Add Neon Effect option, which will add a glare effect. And then you can modify the glare effect by going to the Compositing tab at the top. But that increases the render time, so I'm just going to play a clip of what that looks like over the screen. Back in the Output Properties tab, I can also increase the resolution from the default 1920 by 1080. One more thing is that you can animate these cells in different colors by adding them to separate groups. If you had a network model, you might want to show different cell types in different colors, or maybe excitatory cells in one color and inhibitory in another. But to have the cells be different colors, they have to be in separate groups because these cells will get their display properties from the group that they're in. So let's add two more groups. You can see that they're all currently in group 0. So if I select group 1, and then check off sample cell 1, that will add that sample cell to that group. And they can only be in one group at a time, so that will remove it from group 0. And then I'll select the last group and check off the third cell. And now there's one cell in each group. Then with group 2 selected, I can go down to the cell group options. And currently this group doesn't have any recording settings, but I can just click copy to copy the recording settings from group 0. And then I can go down to the color scale and select a different color. I'll make this one green. And then select the last group and copy the group settings and select a different color. I'll put it in red. And then when I import the cells, now they are in the colors I just set. So I'll go ahead and click render animation again. Yeah, you can see that they are all in different colors. And I'll put a clip of the final render over the screen so you don't have to wait. That's it for this tutorial. If you use BlenderNeuron to make a figure or an animation, please include the BlenderNeuron logo or mention BlenderNeuron so people know how it was made. Thank you for watching, and other BlenderNeuron tutorials can be found on blenderneuron.org/tutorials.